I want to welcome everyone tonight to our George Washington Forum event, part of our Menard Family Speaker Series. I'm Court Rodet. I serve as director of the Menard Family George Washington Forum, as well as associate professor of economics here at Ohio University. And before I introduce our speaker, I want to spotlight the many talented and generous people who help make events like these possible. So I want to especially recognize the support of the Menard family, of course, and likewise, the College of Arts and Sciences communication specialist, Lori Bauer, is extremely generous with her time and helps us get the marketing out for these events. Nikki Ohms and her events team help secure and plan the space. And Jonna Fisher and Jen Campbell help with travel. Cremedia Productions provides videography. And Cameron Dunbar is an extraordinary program coordinator for both the George Washington Forum and the Contemporary History Institute. And we couldn't function without his help. I also want to recognize Andrew Wilkins, the George Washington Forum postdoctoral scholar in history. He's a tremendous inspiration to the forum and makes our reading group meetings really rich and thought-provoking, and thank him for his contributions. And finally, I want to spotlight our George Washington Forum Fellows, who are ambitious, creative, curious, and it's truly a privilege to work with them and work with all of you on a regular basis. So I want to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Ginny CHOI, who holds a PhD in economics from George Mason University and is currently program director of academic and student programming at the Mercatus Center. She's also a senior fellow with the F.A. Hayek program for advanced study in philosophy, politics, and economics. And one of the objectives of the George Washington Forum is to facilitate dialogue between disciplines in order to build a better understanding of the human condition. And she joins us this evening to speak about an ongoing project that introduces modern empirical economics to questions long seen as the purview of philosophers and political thinkers. So the questions at the center of tonight's discussion: do markets corrupt our morals? Bridges theory with empirical data methods naturally raises important questions such as, are markets and capitalism one and the same? What is meant by morality? Is morality the same as virtue? How can these things be measured empirically and analyzed using statistical techniques? How might the results feed back into our moral and economic systems? So I look forward to learning more and hope it inspires discussion and encourages additional scholarship focused on the intersection of ethics and political economy. Please help me welcome Dr. Ginny CHOI.
Thank you so much for the introduction and for inviting me here tonight to speak about my book with my co-author, Dr. Virgil Storr, on this topic, do markets corrupt our morals? I also want to thank all of you guys for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here tonight to hear about me obsess about a topic. I'm a little too obsessed with this topic, so I'm incredibly delighted when people come out to hear me geek out for an hour. So my co-author and I have been working on this topic for over a decade, and there's a peculiarity about this particular debate that really struck out for us when we were beginning to sort of better acquaint ourselves with this debate. And it's that regardless of whether it's the critics of markets or whether it's defenders of markets, there appears to be a general consensus that markets inherently corrupt our morals. Now, that seems a little strange for a debate, right? You would imagine by the term debate, there's going to be two incredibly robust, healthy sides of the conversation that have a lot of disagreements and that the conversation will be quite balanced between the two, but it turns out it's not quite that situation within this particular debate. And it is also reflected in our contemporary political discourse, our social discourse, as well as our popular culture. So if you would join me for a little bit on a detour and let me use some Hollywood movies to sort of exemplify the types of stereotypes that we're talking about. And also, please don't judge me for the movie selections that you see up here. I just like blockbuster movies, and I just like having opportunities to talk about Marvel movies and Chris Evans. So just bear with me for a second. So, for instance, the movie Avatar, at the core of it, there's this large corporation. Oops. it's doing its own thing now. At the core, there's this particular large corporation who has exemplified in many ways that A, it has absolutely no concern for the welfare of their employees, and it has zero concerns about the lives of the indigenous population. Movies such as Wall Street and The Wolf of Wall Street depicts an incredibly cutthroat environment where it's a dog-eat-dog world, and a lot of the characters that you see in these movies are incredibly unpleasant jerks, actually, to put it lightly. They have these vices that you might not be willing to sort of that you would imagine a good friend of yours having, and they have no qualms whatsoever engaging in incredibly immoral behavior, such as fraud, and in fact, even using other people's money to embark on their own private endeavors. In movies such as Kingsman, Knives Out, and The Social Network, there's literally characters, family members, friends who are literally out to kill you to even get more money. And in fact, for movies such as Iron Man, we only regard the businessman who was incredibly sort of also a cutthroat sort of character. We only imagined him to being reformed only after he has somewhat exited the persona of being a businessman and have entered this particular heroic endeavor. And for movies such as Mary Poppins, even these feel-good movies, it's based on this premise of a particular father who is looking to climb the corporate ladder, in fact, in the banking industry, and he spends a lot of his time trying to cater to his bosses, and as a result, is beginning to lose his family. His children feel disconnected, and they feel incredibly unhappy with the particular relationship that they have. And it's only with the intervention of an outside person, a non-market participant, who came in to fix things in the household for him to realize, oh, I have done something wrong, I need to fix this. And the way he fixed it was he completely changed his mindset and was like, look, I'm not all that interested anymore in climbing the corporate ladder. In fact, he said at the end of the movie, he quite literally kind of says, bye-bye, like I don't want to be part of your bank anymore. And he goes off and it's implied that there's a happier life after that. Now, a lot of these stereotypes as well, negative stereotypes of businesses, business people, of markets, of capitalism, is also played out in our contemporary political and social conversations. And the same stereotypes that appear in these Hollywood movies is also being depicted in the academic debate on the morality of markets. Now, the morality of markets, the debate itself, is arguably thousands of years old. My co-author and I identify Aristotle as potentially being one of the first people who sort of entered this particular debate. And in fact, what Aristotle says is he had a bit of a milder view than some of the critic that you're going to encounter next. But he has basically said, look, if you're entering the market for the mere purpose of maintaining your household, it's absolutely fine. Because, of course, your household is incapable of making all the things that your family needs. So, of course, if you have some surplus, go, sell it to another household that might require those additional resources. Please purchase the resources that you need. But it becomes immoral. It becomes a bad behavior when you start selling the surplus for profit. And in fact, he also talks about how as you are in the search of a good life, sure, you can reach a good life through the path of money making, but it's probably unlikely that you're going to reach true happiness in life if you decide to take that path. Having said that, of all the critics that we have encountered in our research, we actually think Karl Marx is probably the critic when it comes to markets and the capitalist system. And in fact, Marx has an incredibly sort of detailed critique against markets. And we would say that he has his critique is actually on three fronts. The first critique is an economic one, where he argued that the free market system, in fact, in his work, he called it capitalism, is internally inconsistent and would inevitably lead to crisis. Second, he had a social critique, and the social critique stressed that there's a necessary antagonism between the social classes, that capitalism cannot survive without. And the third critique that he has, and granted, this is not, and we call it a moral one, though he never called it a moral one, is relying on the inevitability of exploitation and alienation that occurs within a market system. Now, I'm trained as an economist, which means I have an incredibly dry style of writing and delivering, paraphrasing what everybody else has said. And he has incredibly powerful and vivid imageries about how bad the markets the impact of markets on people's morals. So rather than attempting very poorly to paraphrase what he has said, let me just show you some of the quotes that I think delivers the message. By they here, he's talking about the capitalist system. He says, they mutilate the laborer into a fragment of a man, degrade him to the level of an appendage of a machine, destroy every remnant of his charm in his work, and turn it into hated toil. Of the market system, he also says it transforms fidelity into infidelity, love into hate, hate into love, virtue into vice, vice into virtue, servant into master, master into servant, idiocy into intelligence, and intelligence into idiocy. So he's describing how this particular system has the power to turn everything upside down and make us incredibly confused in this particular environment. He describes work as an activity such as suffering. He even says that the capitalist system estranges man's own body from himself, as it does external nature and his spiritual essence, his human being. He says, in a laborer's work, he does not affirm himself, but denies himself, does not feel content, but unhappy, does not develop freely in his physical and mental energy, but mortifies his body and ruins his mind. The worker, therefore, only feels himself outside his work, and in his work, he feels outside himself. He is at home when he's not working, and when he is working, he is not at home. Just as the mutual exchange of products of human activity appears as trading and bargaining, so does the mutual reintegration exchange of the activity itself appear as the division of labor, making man as far as possible an abstract being, an automaton, and transforming him into a spiritual and physical monster. So he's not describing just simply bad things happen to people who participate in market activities and who encounter the market. In fact, he truly believes the mere participation of the market, he truly believes the mere contact with such a thing called the market has the capability to turn you into a spiritual and physical monster. These are incredibly powerful accusations against the market. Now, at this point, you might be wondering, surely there's the debate, Ginny, you said earlier, is thousands of years old. Surely there's a defender out there who's able to provide just as a powerful of a defense. Well, let me show you, for instance, what the father of economics has said about the market. Arguably, the first champion of markets also had concerns about the moral impact that the market has on people, and he had concerns about the morality of people as a result of participating in markets and having contact with the market. And he doesn't actually spend he doesn't spend pages and pages sort of describing it. All of that is kind of sprinkled out throughout his work. So let me just show you a couple of quotes from his Wealth of Nations alone that speak to his concerns. Of division of labor and specialization, he says, the man whose whole life is spent in performing a few simple operations naturally loses, therefore, the habit of such exertion of his understanding, and generally becomes as stupid and ignorant as it is possible for a human creature to become. The torpor of his mind renders him not only incapable of relishing and or bearing a part of any rational conversation, but of conceiving any generous, noble, or tender sentiment, and consequently of forming any just judgment concerning many even of the ordinary duties of life. Of division of labor and specialization, he also says, a person's dexterity at his own particular trade seems in this manner to be acquired at the expense of his intellectual, his social, and his marital values. And finally, he even talks about how it's impossible, in fact, impossible for people of the same trade to get together for anything but reasons to collude against their customers. In Wealth of Nations as well, he says, people of the same trade seldom meet together, even for merriment and diversion. But the conversation ends with a conspiracy against the public or in some contrivance to raise prices. All right, at this point you might be like, okay, so Adam Smith published his Wealth of Nations in 1776. So it's at the advent of capitalism as a system. So perhaps he's just not aware of the possibilities of capitalism. So surely, what about the other defenders after his time? Now, details of the defense for the morality of markets might differ, but we found that they largely fall into three flavors of defenses. First, the first line of defense says, market transforms private vices into public benefits. An example of that is vices such as greed, private vices such as greed, can be channeled in socially beneficial ways. The second line of argument says that markets are amoral spaces that promote neither virtue nor vice. And for that particular line of defense, what it's basically saying is like, look, within economics, we understand institutions also as rules of the game. And what it's saying is, as simply rules of the game as a tool, it's impossible to assess the outcome of the particular game to the game itself, because all it did is define what's possible and what's not possible. So if you see a negative set of outcomes, or if you see a positive set of outcomes, that is speaking to the particular players who played that game. So if you find that the outcomes of the market is immoral, what happened was you had a group of immoral people. And if you find that you had you see a set of moral outcomes, that's because of the type of the moral people who occupied that particular market space. And finally, the last line of defense talks about how non-market economic systems generate worse moral consequences than markets. And in fact, for these kinds of things, the standard sort of comparison has been this socialism of the Soviet Union type. And that, in fact, if you had, for other economic systems, they had worse consequences, more people died. So as a result, the market is the least evil of the available systems. Now, I don't know about you, but if I was Marx, if I had as much concerns as I did, as Marx did, if I truly believed that the market had this capability of turning people into spiritual and physical monsters, that their souls are at risk at being a part of this particular institution, this particular space, I would not be satisfied with people saying, "Oh yeah, totally." It's a place where people's morals get corrupted. But hey, good news, good things happen. Or having a line of defense that completely sidesteps that entire issue and say, yeah, but market's amoral. Or having another sort of counter being like, yeah, but it killed less people. I would be incredibly dissatisfied with those kinds of defenses if I truly worried about the souls of the people who occupy the space. So, do markets really corrupt our morals? Now, I want us to pause for a second here and think about and let's take Marx's implications really sort of far out. Let's not talk about sort of philosophical realms. Let's talk about what he's saying implies about our daily life. What he's implying is when you go to a coffee shop, you should be incredibly worried about the barista behind the bar looking to poison you at any given moment. They're willing to be there to punch you just to get even a dollar more from your pocket than they otherwise would get. They're incredibly myopic. And you wouldn't see in those kinds of spaces baristas and customers changing pleasantries. Hey, how are you? How was your weekend? Hey, I haven't seen you last week. What's been going on? Hey, are you getting your usual today, or are you going to get something different? You wouldn't see in that kind of space those kinds of pleasant conversations happening. You wouldn't see baristas. You wouldn't see any retailers and any customers, clients being concerned about each other. You would not see any of that. On a daily basis, we should see some evidence that markets are corrupting us, and that we are a group of people who we might not find to be incredibly pleasant at all. So based on our daily life alone, I think there's reasons to suspect how far we can take Marx's criticism. And today, what I want to do is not necessarily persuade you guys for either or. In fact, I would think that my job today, I've done an incredible job if two things would happen. One, if you guys pause for a second and reassess your priors. That I would find that if you find at the end of this talk that, hey, like I didn't actually think of that viewpoint, and that is something that makes sense to me. If you even had that thought, even though you still believe that markets are morally corrupting, I call that an immense success. The second thing I would find as a success is if you walk out of here today and don't think I'm crazy, that's pretty awesome too. If you don't like this talk, it's not my fault. Please throw something at Dr. Rodet. I am just here at his invitation. So before I start launching into sort of assessing the existing data that could speak to this, let me do a couple of things. First, so far I've been liberally using words like markets and stuff like that. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes sort of really laying out for you what we mean by the market, what market societies and non-market societies mean to us, at least in this particular context, and also to talk about how we define a market system. Now, and second, what I want to do is lay out some propositions, some hypotheses, according to what the existing literature says. If critics like Marx is correct, we should see a few things boring out also in the data in the data sets. And we now live in a world where we have an immense wealth of data and information that we can use in a quantitative manner. So I'm going to be doing those two things before I launch into the types of evidence that we also walk through in the book. Now, what do we mean by a market? We mean it in quite a broad sense. We define a market to be a space where the buying and selling of goods and services, i.e. economic exchange or commerce, is taking place. So long as there's an act of buying and selling, there's an exchange of an item with money, that's a market. That is a market. Based on that, what it means is market societies, or even commercial societies, are societies where property rights are respected, contracts are enforced, and the rule of law exists. Market societies are spaces where the market system not only operates, but operates without significant interference. And in this kind of world, the market system is used to describe this kind of economic system. Now, there's a couple other words that you might use to describe the market system. The chief among them will be capitalism. Now, if the critics are right and markets are morally corrupting, we should see these three propositions play out in the data sets. Proposition 1, vice is more prevalent in market societies than in non-market societies, and virtue is less prevalent in market societies than in non-market societies. Proposition 2, The more a society embraces the market, the more vice and less virtue will exist in that particular society. And proposition 3, the more a person engages in market activity, the less virtuous they are likely to be. And again, if the critics are right and markets are morally corrupting, this is what the bar charts should look like when we start comparing particular variables with non-market societies versus market societies. On the left-hand side here, for any variables that measure some type of virtue, we should see that there should be more virtue being shown or being exhibited by individuals who reside in non-market societies. And we should see less of that among those who reside in market societies. In terms of variables that might be speaking to vice, it's the opposite. For those individuals who reside in non-market societies should exhibit less vice on average than those who reside in market societies. When we had a look at the data, in fact, it looked the exact opposite. So for instance here, the graphs that you see here are the opposites of the graphs that you just saw in the previous slides. So individuals in market societies, it turns out, on average, exhibit more virtue than those who reside in non-market societies. And what are these variables that I'm talking about? Well, it turns out people in non-market societies have a higher average life satisfaction. They have stronger community and social networks. They exhibit more altruism for others. They have more pro-female oriented views. They have a higher rate of acceptance of homosexuality. They have higher levels of interpersonal and generalized trust, and basically what that means is how much trust do you have in people that you know and how much trust you have in complete strangers. They exhibit higher levels of trustworthiness, and there's a hell of a lot more social mobility that's going on in those in market societies. On the opposite side, over there, those are talking about measures of vice. And what are some examples of variables of vice that we looked at in our book? Economic inequality, materialistic views, critical views of competition, levels of corruption, approval of unethical acts, prejudice against those who are unlike ourselves, and the rate of acceptance of violence. All of those variables that I just listed, on average, less of that was exhibited among individuals who lived in market societies than non-market societies. Now, what does the evidence suggest then, if this is what's playing out? That people can in fact improve their lives through markets and engage in market activity. By engaging in market activity. People living in market societies, turns out on average, are wealthier, healthier, happier, and better connected than those living in non-market societies. People living in market societies are more likely to be altruistic and cosmopolitan and less likely to be materialistic and corrupt. And markets are compatible, it turns out, with the virtues that we value as a society today. And what do I mean? And the types of values that we're talking about with respect to our society today is not necessarily the same things as the Christian and the cardinal values. If you look at sort of the things that we seem to value as a community, as a commercial society, they are things like honesty, promise-keeping, trustworthiness, reliability. Those are the types of things that we seem to value in each other and that we try to uphold as a good person. So I don't want to get too deep into how we determine these commercial values or what Deirdre McCloskey calls bourgeois virtues. But those are the types of virtues that we were looking at as we're investigating, as we're working on our book. What else does the evidence suggest? The evidence suggests that material improvements have moral implications. We are able, turns out, to avoid many difficult moral dilemmas. Many, not all. And as an example for this, example that I might provide is a mother a working mother who has a sick child. Imagine if this mother was wealthy versus if this mother was poor. If the mother was wealthy, it's probably the case that she doesn't need to pause and think very deeply about whether or not she's going to call into work and say, hey, I have to miss work for a few hours or even miss all day today because I need to take my kid to the hospital. You might imagine for a working mother who doesn't have as much wealth to seriously think before she makes any kind of decision to think about what it's implied when she doesn't go to work. By taking her child to the hospital might mean that she's jeopardizing a meal on the table. So, the material improvements don't get us away with all moral dilemmas, but it can help us with some of the difficult ones. We are better positioned to actually improve the lives of others through our market and non-market activities. Now, when you think about the second bullet point, the way I hope you would think about it is kind of like in the spectrum, from the direction of self-care. Think about how you can help your family or help your friends when you feel pretty low on self-care, and when you feel like you've given yourself sufficient care. The way you approach that is quite different, right? Like you are more able to help out others, even through you might be able to on a weekend spend a day with your friend, making sure that your friend is able to move into a new place. You can even you might be even better positioned to be able to say, hey, you know what? Have this $5 on me. Please take it. Because you need spotting. And also, the reason why you might also do that is because you trust your friend to be able to give you and spot you when you're in a dire need. And finally, having material improvements also might mean that we're more interested in helping others. Again, this has a self-care kind of implication, but think about your sort of, you might have been in this situation. I don't know if you have experienced what I have. When I was incredibly busy with grad school work, and I was trying to make sure that I'm meeting all my homework deadlines, that I'm making sure that my dissertation advisor was getting all the things that he asked for, and I'm making sure that I'm getting good grades and all of that. My goodness, I had no time to think about anything else. In fact, I was a pretty unpleasant person to all of my friends. And thank goodness they're still friends with me. That probably speaks volumes about what kind of people there are. But it certainly did not have to do anything with the type of person I was when I was in grad school. I was incredibly short. I was incredibly irritable. I was incredibly annoying. And I just complained a lot every day. Now, so in a space where you might be sort of making sure that you have enough money to put food on the table, or to make sure that you can pay for all the things that you need to pay for your life. If that's what you're principally concerned about, you might actually not be thinking about as much as you would like about how you can help others, not just your friends, not just your family, but even strangers. In Korean, we got this word that doesn't have a good translation into English. And effectively, it kind of translates into luxury of time. And the implication there is if you have a moment to breathe, if you have a moment to think, your perspective and the way you will approach people, the way you will approach situations can drastically change. And something about the market providing material improvements can have effect on that margin. What else does the evidence suggest? The evidence also suggests that maybe, just maybe, markets are moral training grounds. Now, before I explain the bullet points that you see on the slide here, it's probably useful at this point to sort of describe to you how we in the Austrian School of Economics understand the market. Now, in a lot of your principal econ courses and other courses as well, you probably encountered the market as these two things, right? You got a line going up, you got a line pointing down. There's a dot in the middle that represents equilibrium prices. It also represents, it also tells you exactly what the optimal sort of quantity is, et cetera, et cetera. It's a snapshot. It's an end state. Austrian economists understand the market as a process. It is a social body, because in this process of people interacting, there's a lot of movement. It's really about learning about people in this particular space. And a standard in this particular sort of way of understanding the market, actually, you know what? A better way to do it is, let me give you an example. Suppose I'm a buyer. I need to go into the market to buy something. What might be the situation I enter? What might be some things that I think about? When I go into the market, I am going to be faced with a number of sellers, and I'll be able to choose whose product to purchase. I'm going to be able to interact with these multiple sellers. Now, of course, because it's a market space, factors like prices and quality of good is something that I'm probably not going to be able to get away with, right? That's what defines the market. So unfortunately, those are some of the things I'm going to be thinking about. But what are some other things I might be thinking about? I might be thinking about, was this seller incredibly shady when I was interacting with this particular person? Were they professing views that I don't agree with about other people? Or are they just generally a very sort of gruff person, aggressive person, who's making me actually jump out of my skin each time I'm trying to have a conversation with them? Or are they really nice people who are just like, who are easy to have conversations with? Do they present themselves as a trustworthy person? Do they seem like or have they even done things like, hey, you know what, don't worry about paying it this time. I trust you. Why don't you make sure next time to pay for this particular product the next time you're in the store? I might actually go with a pretty pleasant person. And those are the margins that would be incredibly defining for me, especially when I have multiple options in the market with whom that I can actually interact with and from whom that I can purchase products. So in this particular framework, given the way we understand the market, that tells us three major things. If you believe that what I just said has some bite, it seems reasonably sensible as a sensible way to understand the market, then it means that the market are spaces where we discover whether or not the people with whom we're interacting are good or bad. We're learning. We're not some sort of myopic, or we got some short-term memory problems where we might interact with someone today, completely forget this entire interaction and what we learned about them, and repeat it tomorrow. My interactions today, if I think something was off, I'm going to remember that tomorrow. And when I remember that tomorrow, that's going to impact on the margin whether or not I'm going to go back to this person or whether I'm going to go to somebody else. So on the market, we can actually discover good people and bad people in this particular manner. As a result, markets are actually conversations about what's right and wrong. People are learning over time precisely what's acceptable behavior, what's unacceptable behavior. Now, there might be some instances where unacceptable behavior kind of is not punished immediately. They might get away with particular acts. But if the person continues to commit disapproving acts, things that we as a society don't approve, and is exhibiting that behavior with many people, if not all the people that they interact with, over time, this particular person is going to learn that that's not the way to behave, that they need to change their behavior and change the way they present themselves to others, and how they might actually interact with others. And in this particular way, the market teaches us to be better people. And that is actually the gist of the book our book, Do Markets Corrupt Our Morals? Again, thank you so much for being here tonight to hear me speak about this. If you're unhappy again, not me, court, please. So we have about 20 minutes, and I'll be happy to take any questions that you guys might have.
Regarding the variables signifying vice and virtue, how do you know they're purely attributed to markets or lack thereof and not other variables? Like, how did you control for other factors that might be confounding?
I should have known that you were going to ask that question. So we can't tell you for sure that the markets are causing particular types of things. And the reason why we can't tell you that, although economists and those who use regressions will try to tell you as much as possible, we can pinpoint causation. It's incredibly hard because people are complex, and so as societies, as a result, are complex, their behaviors are complex. We can't easily tease out one thing over another. So while we were doing the sort of non-market versus market society comparisons, we didn't directly control for that. Now, because we had anticipated that these kinds of questions would be asked, because economists are incredibly predictable, these are the first set of questions that we get whenever we present this research. So in the appendix, for the appendix, we did actually run some regressions. And we did take a look at what kinds of independent variables might be impacting our dependent variable. For our dependent variables, we used measures of virtue and vices. And when we ran those regressions for all the variables that you see in the book, it turns out the variable for market society more frequently showed up as statistically significant than any other variable, which also includes, by the way, whether or not that country is identified as democracy. So it's not to say that democratic institutions have zero effect, but I truly think it's silly of us to think that one particular isolated type of system or institution has the ability to completely change the face of a society. I think in order to have an incredibly healthy, free, prospering society, all of your economic, social, and political institutions need to at least be compatible with one another and mesh with one another. And even, in fact, would be even better if they were supporting of each other. So it's not surprising that for a market society, that both the market and democracy is actually is oftentimes showing up as being significant for moral and immoral behavior. But again, we think there's something to be said about how the variable for the market more often shows up as being statistically significant than any other variable for our regressions.
Thank you. That was a very good talk. I have several questions,
Yes.
but I'll just stick with one here, and that is the features of markets that you seem to indicate explain the comparison in favor of markets when it comes to morals. I wonder if they could be extended to other social phenomena. What I mean is, for example, learning to expect other people's interests and having, well, the features you listed there at the end, whether they could be used to explain whether, say, a society that has a high degree of emphasis on athletics or sports competition versus those that did not whether similar such explanatory models can be used to explain, if indeed the data, I don't know if there is any data about whether or not, say, participation in sports, for example, increases virtue and decreases vice. So I just wanted to know what you thought about that, and I'll just say my other question in case there's extra time.
All right. So that's not, this is going to be a pretty unsatisfactory response. I haven't quite thought of that very deeply. But now, having said that, right, the market has an ability to, if you understand them, if you believe that we should be understanding the market as a process, it has the ability to uncover and raise to the surface a whole bunch of things that we as a community might be interested in, not just about moral behavior or sort of economic items that we might be interested in, but other things that we as a society care about. And so I think it's absolutely possible, but other than that, I haven't thought very deeply about it, so I'm sorry, I can't say more about that. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your talk. That was, I think you have achieved your 2 objectives.
Yes.
So we all. I had a question about your data. Before coming to OU, I worked at the World Bank, and I found that even getting data from developing countries or the non-market economies, even something so simple as GDP per capita, was fraught with measurement error and all sorts of problems. So you're dealing with things like measuring altruism and prejudice in non-market economies. I just wonder about the reliability of that data.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for that question. We did the best we can, right? Short of getting possibly the largest grant in the entire world of social sciences and deploying hundreds, if not thousands, of researchers into, what is 189 countries or something like that, that's in our data set. And we, unfortunately, those are types of things that we would have encountered anyway. But the reason why we didn't want to go with just one variable and wanted to look at across the spectrum all the sorts of variables that we see is that if it's in fact, if things are incredibly random because as a result of measurement errors and stuff like that, in fact, I think we would see that playing out across the sort of dozens of variables that we looked at. I think we might even see a split down the middle if it's random and all of that. We found confidence in the fact that much more of the variables that would speak to morality and immorality seem to all be showing a particular type of dynamic. And again, but your concern is something that we had as well. So this is one of many projects that we have on morality and sociality of markets. So some of the things that we are doing is, in fact, sort of collecting our own data through surveys. Unfortunately, not at the 189 countries, but we are currently in the process of doing further research in hope that we can, the results that we see in our that we saw in this particular book is something that might also play out in different settings as well. Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah. I think this might be another kind of predictable question, but I'm kind of curious about the decision-making process when categorizing societies between market and non-market. I think you just mentioned that it doesn't necessarily mean like a liberal democratic society, and this kind of gets into the book. But I'm kind of curious as to why like a country like Spain, for example, would be identified as non-market, India as non-market. I think that just kind of makes me wonder what exactly the criteria is for something like that. Thanks.
Thank you so much for asking that question, because I have whoops, going the wrong way. Wait, I am in fact truly going the wrong way. I have a chart. I have a slide for you. So this is how we classified among the countries what is market and non-market society. Now, we operationalized a market society. We labeled a particular country as a market society if its scores for the following indices were all in the top 2/5 of each of the indices for which a score was available for the countries. And these are the 5 indices that we looked at. Basically, the easy sort of non-economistic way of thinking about it is if all the indices that we looked at all said they're in the top 2/5, awesome. We should probably be safe in calling that market society. And if not, if even less than all of the indices said that they're in the top 2/5, then we label them as being non-market. So it's not to speak to the fact that, for instance, we truly think countries like Spain is not a market society. It's in fact on these particular indices that we looked at. In one of them, they weren't in, at least in one of them, they weren't in the top 2/5 of the particular index. Now, because, again, for the previous question about the measurement errors and stuff like that, potentially completely determining all of the results that we see, we hedge that by actually not tying our definition, our quantitative definition of market society to just one index. We tied it to 5 different, so that if a particular index has a very severe critical error, measurement error, that's not having a complete impact on all the things that we are looking at in the book. Yeah. I have a question in the, sorry.
Sorry, I'll try to ask this relatively quickly. So my biggest question was about your second category of defenses for the market, where I think you would probably agree that's where Smith goes. A lot of people fit into that. And I was wondering, what is the necessity of not making a very strong case within the second category, which is to say, kind of maybe abandoning this totalizing, the market always produces moral positives to the market does things, and some of those things are good, and some of those things are bad. And on a related note, Marx, can actually also kind of fit in the second category. He is obviously very negative about markets, but he thinks that markets do a variety of positive things. For instance, create proletarianization, which, while very negative for the people undergoing it, does cause them to act in a way that he would call moral. So it just seems like maybe the second category, making a very strong defense within the second category, is better than, or makes more sense to me anyway, than this totalizing. The markets are either totally good or totally monstrous.
Yeah, so we didn't actually go into sort of strong versions and weak versions. And part of the reason is once we start doing that, the line between defenders and critics break down even further. That's why I think that calling it a debate on the morality of markets is a farce. Because once you really get down to it, once you really get down to what are the particular details of the position of each participant in this debate, the distance between a critic and a defender is actually not that large. So the way we define critics and defenders is effectively sort of largely how do academics view these particular people, and what are the dominant views, if there are any, in their particular arguments about and is it positive or negative about the morality of markets. So that's sort of how we got into it. But of course, if we want to dig into like all the works of Adam Smith and all the works of Karl Marx, I imagine that because Karl Marx was an incredibly careful reader of Adam Smith, we probably will find a lot of overlap between the two. Sir, yes.
So I was wondering, we're kind of talking more about the general broad market. I was wondering what kind of vices and virtues do you think it's more virtuous, like the financial market per se? Because I see some big vices coming from it as like greed and pride. And I was just curious, I don't know if you touched on it more in the book, but what your thoughts are personally about the financial market and if it's more virtuous or supports more vices.
So I don't have a strong view on that. Partially it's because we were looking, the core question that we were interested in answering is, do markets corrupt our morals, not particular markets. Now, I will say though, depending on the particular nature of markets, because we're talking about on average, I imagine there might be some types of markets, maybe for example, like the model of the farmer's market, right, that might exhibit particular type of behaviors that we might find more sort of pleasant and accepting as a society than the financial market, right? So that's what I imagine, and that's my personal thoughts on it. I can't speak for my co-author on that. But in terms of the financial market, I'm sorry, I haven't thought very deeply about particular vices and virtues there.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
So I appreciate as you're thinking about the topic of whether markets corrupt our morals or not, you did obviously a very well thought out comparison between market societies and non-market societies. But I'm just curious to know whether or not you have looked at this in a context of moral progress within a market society, as opposed to comparing it from a market society to a non-market society. Our market society here in the United States is quite different than when it was first established. And so have you looked at the concept of moral progress within a market society, or the lack of moral progress or moral degradation in a market society over a period of time and a period of development?
Thank you so much for that question. Those are some things that we are working towards, right? That's the next set of questions that we had, because what you're looking at and what I presented today to you guys is basically a snapshot. We did a snapshot thing and said, hey, in this current state, what does it say about morality or immorality of markets? Naturally, once, as you mentioned, some of the things we are curious about is as a particular society matures as a market society, not a market economy, by the way, that merely uses the market to allocate goods and services to different parts of their country. I genuinely mean a market society that has embraced commerce, that has embraced the market as part of daily life. As societies grow into that and mature as a market society, the next thing you want to know about, and that might be the next step to the question here, is how is it improving the morality of the individuals who reside in that particular society? And if or not, exactly. And if you believe that the market is a process, is a space where it's a moral training ground, fingers crossed, that's going to show up there. The last slide where I laid out some possible mechanisms that might be explaining what we see, it's just a conjecture at this point, right? Like it's possible to study it in an empirical manner. It will be messy, it will be difficult, but we have ways of trying to get at it. We just aren't I'm unfortunately unable to give you an answer tonight about that.
If I may ask a question, I have a concern about the argument that in a market society you're able to better avoid certain moral dilemmas.
Yeah.
And granted, you gave a single example, but if we take that example to the extreme, it might imply that, well, if you're poor, then it's really hard to make good decisions and moral decisions. You might be more likely to be immoral if you're poor, which is a terrible conclusion. But it might just be that you don't have the ability to get out of moral dilemmas. It's just you face different moral dilemmas. And I wonder if you could speak to that, explicate that a little bit more, unpack that, because that's quite a claim.
Yeah. When we were thinking about effectively the moral dilemmas that we laid out are a particular type of moral dilemmas, and in philosophy they call it trolley problems. We were specifically looking at trolley problems and from those kinds, the popular kinds of examples that philosophers use to sort of talk about trolley problems. You saw what we thought a material improvement might imply. Now, I don't profess to know all the difficulties and types of moral dilemmas that everyone faces at different in society, and this is going to come across pretty unsatisfying, but I don't know. I don't think the market, in terms of moral dilemmas, will actually do away with all of them, nor or even do away with all the important ones. I think there's going to be particular types of dilemmas that the market is unable to sort of respond to, will be unsatisfactory on those margins. But the point that we are making is there are particular types of dilemmas that can be avoided as a result of a material improvement, and we think that's speaking to speaking more towards for markets than against markets.
Just kind of piggybacking on that question there, a lot of ethicists and moral philosophers, especially traditionally, this is precisely why they would distinguish, accidents, essentially. So someone like Schopenhauer would say, totally avoiding the problem, we can decide that's a good, we can will, society in general would work that way, but it's not actually ethical or unethical to not have the problem because ethics refers to how people act in a situation. So I think, and this is a problem not a problem, but this is something I was seeing in the book, which I think we should distinguish between the good for society, what we mean by how society should be, the ideal, and the good as in someone acting well, or someone being morally good personally, because I think those are two separate conditions, and they might be linked, and in fact, Smith would argue they are linked, but they are two different things.
Yeah, no, absolutely, I agree with that. Any other questions?
I'll piggyback on that one also, just because I teach a class on poverty and also on altruism, and so I'm interested in that particular aspect. Like empirically, we don't necessarily see that people get more altruistic as they get richer. It depends how you're defining that, but like actually poorer people do give away a larger percentage of what they have, and often like poorer people tend to act more, they use mechanisms of kind of social insurance, of helping one another, precisely because of their poverty. And as you get richer and richer, then you become more independent. And the richest often get to be very isolated from the rest of society. So that part doesn't, to me, unpack as well. But I'm not sure exactly the questions you were asking in order to get to that conclusion. So I don't know if you want to maybe elaborate a little bit on what were the questions that people were answering to shed light on that.
So it's actually the World Value Survey. And with respect to altruism, so it's been a while since I looked at all their questionnaires, so I do apologize if I'm remembering it incorrectly. I think in terms of altruism, they did specifically ask things like, in the past month, did you provide a cash donation to anyone? In the past month, have you helped out anyone not using cash or something like that? So they have asked those questions in the World Value Survey. And in fact, we also used a similar variable from the National Charitable Giving Data or something. Like there's a particular corporation, or rather, a think tank that is taking, that did collect specifically on charitable giving. And we looked at those kinds of variables, and what they showed was that on average, countries that are identified as market societies according to our classification, on average, higher proportion of people have responded saying that they helped out someone, whether it's with money or through other non-monetary means, that they have helped someone in the last 30 days. So it wasn't about amount of money, although we do also have that in the book. The part when it speaks to altruism, it's about who has responded that they have done that in the last month.
So I think we're running out of time. I want to thank you guys for your questions and sticking around. I want to thank Professor Choi for her time as well. Do want to plug, we have another talk next week, next Monday. Professor Bill Easterly of NYU will be speaking on poverty and his experience working for the World Bank and understanding what sort of policies or liberties, freedoms can alleviate poverty around the world. So I invite you to come back next Monday. So let's give another thank you to Professor Choi.
Thank you so much.